Good morning. Tuesday, June 11th. This is the Reinvestment Zone number 2 meeting. The meeting is called to order. Ms. Huerta, will you please call the roll?
Chairman Dan Suckley.
Here.
Board members Roland Barrera.
Here.
Sylvia Campos. Brent Chesney is absent. Joe Gonzalez is absent. Paulette Guajardo. Present. Gil Hernandez.
Here.
Michael Hunter.
Here.
Jim Klein.
Here.
John Mattis is absent. Mike Pesley is here. I think he's in the back, but he is here. Everett Roy is absent. Connie Scott is absent. So we do have a quorum present to conduct the meeting.
All right, thank you. Public comment. Would anyone like to make public comment? Ms. Huerta, have you received any public comments?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Moving on to D, minutes. If everyone's had a chance to review the minutes, are there any corrections to the minutes? If there are none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion carries. Financial report. TIRZ number 2 financial reports as of April 30th, 2024, and we also got a handout a second ago.
Good morning, Heather Holbert, Assistant City Manager. Yes, there were a couple just updates to the financial reports after the packet was published, so you should have a hard copy in front of you. Okay, can we bring the presentation up, please? Okay, there we go. So as the chairman mentioned, these are the financial reports for the 7 months ended April 30th, 2024. And so the fund began the year with a fund balance of $14.2 million. Year-to-date revenues collected is $6.2 million. And then expenses paid out were $500,000 for professional services, $9.1 million for transfers out, and these are for the ongoing CIP projects that are being done, which include the paper streets, the effluent water line, the North Padre seawall improvements, along with the shoaling prevention for the 2 bridges that were approved. That leaves an ending fund balance as of April 30th of $11.2 million. And so we do have a total commitments of $31.8 million, which will be paid out over several years going forward. And we currently still have the maintenance reserve of $500,000, which we'll be talking a little bit about during our budget. So then looking at our CIP projects, we currently have $26.2 million worth of CIP projects budgeted. Spent against those projects is $12.3 million, leaving a balance within the CIP fund of almost $14 million. All of these projects are in progress or waiting for design, but they are active projects. So then looking to our cash flow and our commitments, this shows we keep our revenues flat as we go through these estimations, since we don't know what future years are going to look like. And we have our current and future incentive commitments there in the second column, and then we estimate what our admin and other expenses are, which then produces our estimated fund balance at the end of each of those years. As reviewing through this, one thing we did realize is that we don't have our commitments for our future CIP, like second and third year of our CIP projects, and so we will update that in the next month. That equals for fiscal year 25 is about, I think, $11 million, and in 26 it would be an additional another $11 million. In fiscal year 27 it'd be $7 million, and so we'll update those so they're properly reflected in the fund balances.
Mr. Hunter, do you have a question, please?
Oh, no, sorry. I was getting my screen turned on.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. And then here's a detail of the commitments. We have numerous commitments with Lake Padre Development Company. We also have numerous commitments with the Whitecap Development, which a lot of those are in process right now. So this shows when we expect to pay these out. We will continue to monitor those with the developers, and so these years may adjust just slightly as they move through their processes. And that does conclude the financial reports. I'm available for any questions.
All right, looks like we have no questions. Moving on, no executive session items today. Moving on to H, presentation items. Update on North Padre Island seawall improvements. Mr. Edmonds.
Let's see, I've got a presentation, if we can pull that up. So for folks viewing remotely or on replay, I'm Jeff Edmonds, Director of Engineering Services. And what we do in engineering services, we manage implementation of the city's capital improvement program. The project we're going to talk about today was a new project that was added in the FY24 CIP, and Heather wanted to brief the board on this because it's a very significant project in the TIRZ 2 project plan. So the seawall, North Padre Island seawall, that was subsequently renamed as the Michael J. Ellis seawall, those are one and the same. It's been a focal point and a destination on the island starting around 1970. And it continues to be a major attraction and focal point today. Now, this is a timeline on events related to the seawall. It's had a long and storied past. I'm not going to go through all of that. The construction began in 1968. An important event was in 1972. State of Texas obtained a court order halting the construction. It was originally intended to extend all the way north to Zahn Road and about 1,000 feet south. And the problem is that the state claimed that it was constructed on land that was owned by the state of Texas, and there was a court battle on that. There was some subsequent legislation on that, and it does create some interesting wrinkles on this project. It's not technically very complex, but administratively it's above average complexity. Major event last year with the approval of the CIP. This was approved as a TIRZ 2 project. And that's what's in the approved CIP. It might be a little hard to read, and there might be some changes in the spend pattern on that in the new CIP, but it's budgeted total cost $15 million. Okay, some of the background on this. So the seawall was privately built. It was built by the Padre Island Investment Corporation. And like I mentioned, the state basically sued for trespass and prevailed on that. They claimed, the doctrine of Texas open beaches and state submerged land, they claimed that they were essentially using the seawall to claim land that was property of the state. There was a judgment in 1974, but that left the titles a little bit clouded. The Open Beaches Act defines the property line as what they call a rolling easement. So it's defined as the vegetation line. Of course, where you got the seawall, you don't have a vegetation line. So it created some cloud on the title. There was subsequent legislation in 1995 to help clarify that and defined the public easement as the face of the seawall, but that also required some action on their behalf. They had to dedicate land and provide for public parking and public access. So the city helped them with construction of that parking lot. It's city-owned parking lot now, but they had to pass the hat to come up with the money to purchase that land and build that parking lot. Unfortunately, a lot of people kind of blame the city for that, but really we just helped them to accomplish what was required by the state legislation. Okay, the current status, as I said, it's privately owned and maintained, and it's showing its age, unfortunately. Now, the owners cannot restrict public access to this, so it looks like a public asset, and they can't get insurance on it. And currently, it's not eligible for FEMA public assistance if something happens to it. So if there was catastrophic damage, it would become the responsibility of the property owners. And unfortunately, that's not really a hypothetical. That actually happened in the past. Let's see, as I mentioned, the new $15 million project, part of what we've got to do to make this a public project is resolve these real estate issues. We also want to be in a posture that we would be eligible for FEMA reimbursement if something happens. And to do that, we need to become legally responsible. Should I take?
Mr. Pusley.
Do you have?
I'm sorry, I do have a question, but if you want to go ahead and finish.
Okay, I'll just keep rolling, and we can take questions at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and we can go back to the presentation. Okay, so we've gotten some expert advice on steps we can take to help increase the likelihood that any future disaster repairs would be FEMA PA eligible. And one would be an action by the City Council taking legal responsibility. We're also going to try and get a negative determination from Army Corps of Engineers and NRCS saying that basically they are not going to help, that this isn't eligible for assistance under programs they manage. And we'll keep that filed away, and in the event we do have damage in the future, we hope those things would help ensure that we would be eligible for FEMA public assistance. A big benefit for the owners is obviously they're not going to be on the hook for not only routine maintenance, but any major storm damage. Like I said, it's not a hypothetical. There was significant damage in 1980 from Hurricane Allen. The owners out there essentially passed the hat amongst themselves to come up with the funding to repair that. Okay, a little bit about the FEMA PA program. It provides federal grant assistance for the restoration of disaster-damaged public facilities. And there are certain private nonprofits that are also eligible under this program, but it's very severely limited. My opinion is that in its current state, this would not be eligible. I don't think they could make an argument for FEMA public assistance. 4 basic components: you've got to be an eligible applicant, eligible facility, be doing eligible work, and have eligible cost. And by being publicly maintained by political subdivision, that would check that box of being an eligible applicant. As I mentioned, we need to take some sort of action, we believe, to assume legal responsibility for the seawall. That's going to be coming sometime to council in the future. And we want to avoid getting this classified as a flood control work under the definition by the Army Corps of Engineers. And some of you are familiar with this sort of goat rope that we went through with FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers on Packery Channel. That was because the Army Corps said that, oh yeah, this classifies as a flood control work. And then FEMA says, okay, then we're not on the hook for this. It's under Army Corps authority. And the Army Corps said, yes, it is a flood control work, and in theory we could help you, but in practice we can't. And it took us about 1.5 years to get that rolled back and get that back eligible under FEMA PA. So we would like to take some actions in advance to help vaccinate us against a similar type occurrence if we have catastrophic damage on the seawall. So this is a review of where we are. As I mentioned, this was a new project in the CIP last year. So we did consult with a specialist. It was a guy that helped us out with some of the Packard Channel issues on things we could do to help optimize the likelihood for FEMA PA eligibility. We've done property survey. We selected our engineer on that. We have been engaging with all of the property owners. Back in April, we had a town hall meeting that was directed at the property owners. We have formed a steering committee of some of the landowners that are really advocating to help move this project forward. We got a letter of intent to grant the easement signed by the Gulfstream condominiums, and we're using that as kind of a template, trying to get a similar letter from all of the property owners. So that's what we've done. Next steps, we're using that Gulfstream letter and distributing that out to the others, trying to get them to sign that. There will be an action that we're going to have to schedule on a council agenda to take that legal responsibility. I would make that conditioned upon receiving all of the appropriate maintenance easements from all the adjoining property owners, so that would help leverage getting them to go ahead and execute those documents. And as I mentioned, we'll seek those negative determinations from Army Corps, NRCS. There will be a design contract that will ultimately come to council for production of the bid documents on this. We're going to put hopefully some minor amenities there like lighting and just improve the overall maintenance condition. We'll continue to engage with the stakeholders there on the design aspects, make sure they're comfortable with it, and they want to have some level of approval over anything we put there. They don't want things that, for example, block the view, and they don't want to grant us just carte blanche to have any kind of activity we want on the seawall. After we get through the bid doc prep phase, get all the real estate issues nailed down, probably be early to mid next year, we'll be advertising for bids, and then we're expecting it's going to be 12 to 18 months of construction after that. As I mentioned, this is a little bit of a hairball from a legal standpoint. At one point, they named the PIPOA trustee of the seawall. They've never really performed in that capacity, but we need to get a deed from them, sort of conveying that, unringing that bell, if you will, unwinding that trustee designation. There is an amendment to the protective covenants that needs to be deleted. And of course, we want the easement from each current property owner there, and that council action I mentioned. I think that's it. Well, that concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions you have now.
Thank you, Mr. Edmonds. Board Member Pusley.
There you go. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Let's see. I made a note here. Goat rope. Is that an engineering term? Anyway. Okay. I have.
That's a federal government term.
Federal government term. I can appreciate that. And I didn't have a chance to call Councilman Suckley about this, and Councilman Suckley, I apologize. Could have gone over some of these questions with you, but why do we want to assume this responsibility? I mean, this wall wasn't built by us. I'm not sure it was a great idea for us, the city, to have built a parking lot that we have to maintain behind a seawall that we don't own. I mean, what is the purpose and reasoning for us wanting to put at least $15 million of taxpayers' money into this project? What does this do for the city?
Well, let me take a stab at it, and just for the record, My job is just to get them done after they're in.
No.
CIP.
I'm not blaming you for
So
this.
part of this is speculation on
And
why it was
Mr.
recommended.
Chairman may have some input on this as well, but I'm just trying to determine why we want to, because if we do what we're saying here in this document that you've presented this morning, we're going to assume all of the responsibility, all the construction costs, all of the future construction costs. This is going to be, one of the many items that the city owns that Mother Nature is going to work against 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the next time we have a storm, it could be, wiped out. So I'm just trying to determine why it is we want to assume those responsibilities.
So I'm
And the
going to
cost
speculate on what I think. So now we maintain the beach in front of the seawall already.
Understood.
And that is a big destination for folks not only living all over Corpus Christi, but for tourism.
But they would do that whether that seawall was there or not.
Possibly. The other thing is that you have some very valuable real estate there, and you have an interest in seeing that develop. You have an interest in seeing folks come to the community, and it serves as a destination. It can kind of go one way or the other. It's in a bad state right now, and absent public agency taking it over and making a public asset, the owners probably are not going to have the wherewithal to maintain this. If it does get damaged in the future, that's probably going to be difficult for them to recover, and it's a very key part of the city. It was built before it was annexed. It was out in the county before city annexed there in 1981. And the public, people that go there, you come to as a visitor to Corpus Christi, you go out there and you think it's a public asset. You have complete unfettered access to it, but yet it's really privately maintained.
And Jeff, I'm not saying that I'm against doing what we're going to do here. I'm just trying to ask the questions that we may be asked by constituents as to why we want to assume this responsibility, because it's a big responsibility.
Right, Councilman, can I add to all of what Jeff said?
I was hoping somebody would jump in.
Yeah, all of what Jeff said is part of the answer. Another big part, though, is the legal result of the lawsuit and the settlement. That this is the public has the right to walk on and activity on and stay on the seawall. So even for the Corpus Christian, and especially the visiting public, they think it's a city asset. And seeing the shape that it's in today reflects on the city, and it has an impact on the visitor who may trip on or who may wonder why this place looks so bad. And so it impinges or it impacts future trips to the city potentially. And so I think that's the biggest issue, is that the city, if it looks bad, if there's an incident on it with rebar exposed, the city gets the blame for it. And it is part of the destination of the Padre beaches that we maintain and are part of our city. So I think that's the prevailing reason why we're recommending this. I know that's the prevailing reason why we're recommending this, because it's because of the legal settlement. By all intents and purposes, even though it's not, it appears to be a city asset. Number one. Number two, the property owners are not going to maintain it. Otherwise, they would have. They don't have the wherewithal. There's numerous parcels that make up this seawall. And so even if they fix their little section, it could be inconsistent with the rest of the section, or the next owner could do some adjustments to their section, and it would be incongruent, inconsistent. And then thirdly, if there is a hurricane, it's not going to get fixed by FEMA funds or by the federal government because of the ownership status. And so it could look reckless for years, just like those pictures showed. I don't know how they afford to fix it that last time when there was that hurricane. So this won't put it in the city's ownership. We won't own it. The title is not turned over to the city, but because we would be the governing steward of it, then it becomes eligible for FEMA reimbursement.
Well, wait a minute. The documents in this presentation state that we're going to take ownership from, we're getting people to sign.
No, it's
Was it an easement?
It's easements, right? We need construction easements to be able to get, we need several feet on both sides of the seawall to, if we have to get underneath to stabilize, to do shoring of the bulkheading system or what have you.
Okay.
So the easements are just construction easements and easements to maintain, but there'll be no ownership transfer. We won't own it. I doubt we would ever be able to with all those property owners. They're not going to give that property up to the city, but they would have to agree to give us easements for the construction. And so under that same relationship, we would be the stewards of it, and then it becomes eligible then for FEMA reimbursement if there's a hurricane event.
Okay.
So those are the compelling factors. The other ones that Jeff said, we're maintaining the beach, and all those others are accurate as well, but those are the prevailing ones.
Well, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, and when you say that we're not going to own it, we are going to own the responsibility for care and maintenance.
That's true.
And
Right.
so it's almost as if we're doing care and maintenance on private property.
That is it. That's exactly what we're doing.
I would look at this kind of like a private street that they're now turning over to be a public street.
But when we do that, Jeff, every time I've ever seen, when we take over a private street, we take over ownership of that property.
Well, the streets are in
becomes city
a
property.
right-of-way.
This is not going to be city property. This is going to be owned by private landowners.
Yeah, it's not. The street may not be the best example. As you articulated, those are the facts of it. So we're recommending it. If the TIRZ board doesn't want to pursue it, no problem.
I'm just
Yeah.
asking the question.
No,
Thank
that's
you very
good.
much.
Yes, sir.
I'll just add in real quick. Peter and Mr. Edmonds have said it well, but it is a focal point for the island. You know, that asset is deemed to be a public asset, and to Peter's point, a lot of folks think it's the city's responsibility. It is in a deteriorating state right now. It does have some safety issues, but we've got hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate investments behind that seawall, and although that is those particular owners' responsibility right now to repair it, there is no plan in place. There's no funding. There's no advocacy to do that. And so I've heard nothing but positive since we've started this process last year. I've had a lot of good feedback from folks that, hey, it's about time. We need a plan for this going forward. Let's just hope in the meantime, the next year or two, we don't have a catastrophic storm because there is not a plan in that event. So, Board Member Guajardo. Not there.
All right, thank you. And I guess I had the same concerns as Councilman Pusley to a degree. Let me start with, do we know what the damage was back Hurricane Allen?
Well, I've got photographs. I don't have
We don't know.
invoices. I don't know what it cost them to get it fixed. That was actually before it was annexed into the city.
But they fixed it.
They fixed it. They
So
had
came
to,
up with quite
they had to pass that. They assessed themselves to come up with the money
Wow.
to fix it.
Okay, my second concern that hasn't been brought up is, I would think the concern is public safety. You know, if that is deteriorating and it's dangerous and people think it's city property, regardless of whose property they think it is, it's dangerous, right? It could be a public safety hazard. At the same time, as Councilman Pusley brought up, I understand why we're concerned with it, but I guess number one, how did this even come up? And number two, you mentioned development. So if we're not owning the property, we're basically maintaining property for someone else who can't, but they don't, because I went to one of these meetings. They don't necessarily all want to give their property up. And that was a big concern, I think, was, well, if we give this up, there was something about rebuilding, wasn't there, Dan? A concern?
Yeah, there were some folks that wanted some promises made with respect to rebuilding their properties and things that really has nothing to do with this process. But we've kind of, Jeff and his team and the committee have kind of aligned ideas and expectations going forward of what we're doing here.
Right, in
So,
meetings. And I
yeah.
know y'all have had meetings, and that's great. But what about development? You mentioned something about development. Is that being that we're just maintaining? It's not like we're owning the property.
Right. Well, regarding new development, there's a lot of undeveloped land there too. And I think this issue has been an impediment to development
Right.
of some of that vacant land, one. And I will kind of defend my roadway analogy because technically when you plat, we don't get a fee simple title to that. If we either, and you can testify to this, we've got tons of streets that exist only on paper. And if you don't develop it, or if you close it, if you cease to operate as a road, the property reverts to the owners. And so we want to have some kind of maintenance easement so nobody's going to challenge us going in there and doing what we need to do. Some folks might argue we've already got it because there was an action by the adjoining property owners to grant the city an easement, but they had previously named the PIPOA trustee and they didn't sign off on that action. So part of what we're doing is trying to just perfect that and be sure we've got a bow on it.
Right. And what would you say the percentage is right now of the property owners who are for, moving this forward?
I haven't encountered anybody that's not when they understand the issue.
Okay.
So the Gulfstream has already signed a letter of intent saying that they will grant the easement, and the Portofino is in the process of doing the same thing. And we're trying to collect those from all the property owners. And I would recommend if the council does take the action to take this over, that we condition it upon getting all of those easements that we require.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Board Member Hernandez. Sorry, it's got me locked out now.
Yeah, I'm having the same thing.
Press on the deal. There it goes.
Okay. Peter, how are we going to pay for this?
There's $15 million in the TIRZ, in this TIRZ.
Okay.
That's in the budget.
So the TIRZ is eventually going to be reduced down as we go through the 20 years of the TIRZ.
Right.
And we'll still be on the hook for this going in the future after that, correct?
So the $15 million would be a restoration project, shoring up, and anything after that, right, there's no funds set aside if there's some other event or some future maintenance, correct?
And the process is to make this an easement, the city take over, and then we take on the restoration project, correct?
That's correct.
But, just a second, Jeff, is the whole seawall an easement or just construction easements on the backside of the seawall in between?
Well, it's the entire
Seawall, okay. I think the entire seawall plus some additional space to get to the backside of it?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
And it's just for the existing structure. There's no intent to extend it.
No.
That's correct.
There isn't, however, some conversations with the property owners is to enhance it, so it could change its shape a little bit. Not to extend it necessarily to the side near the property, or really to the...
Well, when Jeff was talking about it, they said that it was originally supposed to go further south.
Oh, okay, you're right. Extending it north or south, no. Widening it east to west, potentially.
Okay, and it is for us to be a city project to do, right?
Say that's the second sentence?
So we're going to take it over, then the city's going to assume the construction and management of it, right?
Yeah, that $15 million that's in the TIRZ budget.
So why not, no offense, Jeff, but you're expensive, right? It costs us city twice as much to do something as it does the private sector. Why not have them repair it and fund it through the TIRZ and then assume the responsibility for it as opposed to do it the other way?
Have them repair it, have the property owner repair it?
Right. And funded, with the guarantee of funding through the TIRZ support, not unlike what we do projects for economic development. Because they could probably do it faster. They can, do some, it's an option to save cost associated with it, as opposed to us do it and have to go through all the rigmarole associated with it. I mean, it just, has that discussion been discussed? I mean, has that
Jeff can answer it, but there's over 80 property owners.
Well, there's about, so 4 of the properties are developed condominiums.
Right.
So, and each one has kind of different bylaws, and they're working through the action that they need to do to grant on behalf of the complex.
Right.
But one of the main benefits that they want isn't so much the construction and the current upgrade, it's the city assuming responsibility for it in the event of major disaster damage.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the results are the same. It's just who does the process on the front side. I mean, we'll assume it once it's completed. We could save a bunch of money that way through the private sector doing it, as opposed to having us do it.
Yeah, if we could get, I think the issue would be getting all the property owners, whether they're in a condominium or the single condominium management entity, to all get on the same page.
Yeah, I mean that's.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see the difference, other than the expense of us doing it versus a private entity doing it.
Right. The difference would be on our side, the way we see it, is it would be complexity in trying to get everybody to be in agreement. And then who would manage the project? They'd have to self-appoint, so to speak, unless they all work together. It may be a little more cumbersome. You could probably get there in the end, Councilman, as you're saying.
Well, it's cumbersome either way. I mean, our processes are cumbersome.
Yeah, but having one entity like a Jeff Edmonds overseeing the construction, and we know who's in charge versus.
And it's not that Jeff doesn't have a lot of work to do already with the $700 million CIP, right? With all the other city projects, I'm just assuming you have so much extra capacity, right?
Well, this is one
I'm being
of many,
facetious,
obviously.
Jeff. I'm being facetious. You don't have to answer that.
No, I mean, we don't pick them. We just, once council approves them in the CIP, our job is to get it done, so.
Right. So I'm just saying, if we haven't looked into it, we need to look into it as to see if there'd be significant savings. Is there an option to do that? I don't have a problem with us taking it over, but it seems that we're putting the cart before the horse, and then we're assuming all the responsibility and time and effort and city resources to do something that can be theoretically done by a private sector, and then us assume it and fund it through a TIRZ, because if you think about TIRZ being economic development and reinvestment, we can do it that way.
Yeah, that's possible.
Right.
One response is, and this is not to be facetious or argumentative, but then why hasn't it been done yet? The reason we're here is because the property owners have not either didn't know how to, or.
I don't know if it's been discussed or suggested.
Well, they can see it. I mean, the place is a disaster. They live right on it. So we're here to say, okay, well, let's try a different approach, which is.
Okay, but we're assuming they know that how the TIRZ works. I don't assume that the private sector automatically knows that the TIRZ can be funded that way. So I want to at least have that discussion to see if it's an option, and see if it can be done faster at lower expense than what it would cost for us to do it.
Sure.
In the essence of time, since the other TIRZ meeting, I think, is supposed to start now, and we still have some work to do here. Noted, good suggestion, and we'll circle back with Mr. Edmonds and Peter on that.
Yeah, we'll ask some Councilman Hernandez at our next meeting.
Right. If we could save Jeff some time and effort, and his staff some time and effort to allow the private sector to do this, so he can focus on our current projects.
Okay, we'll check with him.
It might be something that we could do.
Well, I would clarify a little bit. It will be the private sector doing the heavy lifting on this. We just kind of manage it. You're going to have a private.
He knows that, Jeff.
I understand that.
We understand it, Councilman. Yeah, we'll ask.
Got it. Thank you.
Board Member Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. So I guess it was a good idea to not allocate 50% of the tax income to the TIRZ. I think that we made the right choice going forward, so good job with that. And this is a good example of why we shouldn't have done that. I guess what I'm concerned about is pretty basic. They've been asking the same questions. With the income that we're going to be having come in from the sales tax money with this giant Whitecap project, will we not have sufficient funds to do this project? And if we do, which I believe we do looking at those numbers, what else would we be spending it on? what should we be holding onto our money for instead of this project? What's more important?
So just a reminder, so the TIRZ is property taxes, not sales taxes. And so, I mean, right now it was included in the project and financing plan. The $15 million for this was in part of the project and financing plan. And so it has been taken into consideration. There is sufficient money to do this and other projects within the TIRZ. So, I mean, if it's something that the board chooses to remove that from the project and financing plan, we definitely can do that.
So what is it? I don't know where I suggested it was a sales tax. What do you mean by that?
You said with the sales tax that White Cap is going to be producing, that there's something in addition that we could utilize for. So yeah, I just want to remind it is property taxes, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's $1 billion project. It's going to be generating a ton of money. So what other projects should we do instead of this one?
That would be up to the board. We've got other projects included in the project and financing plan.
Have you heard of a bigger project in your district that people want to join up on? Because here's the I agree with Councilman Hernandez. If it is done by the private, they have a lot of different ways of going about getting a project done. Don't have to go through the same steps y'all do. But in this case, you might have to, because if it is given city property, they might have to take the same steps. So I am concerned about that. And I'd like to get moving on something like this, because government works slow, and the next time that we'll have this opportunity is who knows when.
So I guess just a correction, so this project is in process. It was improved within the 24 CIP. It was approved within the project and financing plan by the board, and it was improved in last year's budget to move forward with it. So we are moving forward with this project.
But we're not completely.
So we're still working through the ownership piece of it, but you know, so if there's something that the board chooses not to move forward with this project, we'll need to know that so we can stop the work that's being done on it.
It seems pretty easy to me. Thank you, sorry.
It's okay.
Board Member Roy.
You know, one of the things that I hate to bring this up, but when you take a look at this project and some of the things that are being said, like, you know, the ownership is on the people, but because the fact that it's a public area and it looks bad and people make the assumption that it's city-owned, I can't help but bringing up the analogy of sidewalks, because it's kind of the same thing. You know, people come into our city, they look at the sidewalks or the lack of sidewalks, and they make the assumption that that's part of the city's control, when in fact it's the owner's control. So we have a situation here you know, that we're stepping up and we're fixing an issue, a problem, because of the optics of it. But we don't do that with everything. I'm not saying that this project doesn't need to be done, but I want us to be careful when we engage projects like this, because there's a lot of things that we could do based on optics. And the other thing I think, and this is just, and I know that we've got to start the meeting, but this is a really large scope project. Sidewalks aren't, you know what I mean? It's just somebody's house or their business or something like that. And I do think there is some merit in terms of managing it overall, because that's the other thing too, is that I would assume that if we do it through the TIRZ, but if they're owners, I think you said 2 condo?
4.
There's 4 condos.
Four condos. Does that affect their assessments?
No.
It doesn't. So there's no increase on their assessments or anything, which is kind of nice on their behalf to have that done when we don't own it. So I just want us to think about that, and there's no response required. Thank you.
Board Member Barrera.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so we approved this council approved this last year, correct? In the CIP?
It is in the approved CIP, yes.
It is approved in the CIP, and I mean, I think the only one that voted against the budget was Michael, right? Oh, and Gil. Capital improvement budget. Okay, so this was pretty much overwhelmingly approved. At what component, I guess if you were to put this all together with regard to where we're at, because we gave you that direction, Are we 20% there, 30% there?
I think it might be fair to say 20%.
Okay, so we're already moved along. We've already spent staff time. We're already moving along with it. The other thing is that, you know, I know people get bored with my stories, but, you know, 30 years ago, I used to live at the beach, maybe 35 years ago. And, you know, there was tons of crowds. I mean, I know we had drone footage. There were tons of crowds during spring break. For the first time I went out there with my grandchildren, and there was a big crowd. You know, had to get there early to be able to find a space. And I used to say, I love the beach. I just hate the sand and the water, you know. But, you know, the thing is that it's a community destination of which we have the responsibility of protecting the community that's there. We have the responsibility of protecting an asset because we had some individuals that, I guess, as you were telling me back in the 60s, took responsibility for an asset that was outside the city limits because it was, and then those individuals invested in it, and now we recognize the need because of the volume and all the utilization that it has, that it's responsible for us to take over. I mean, if it was a neighborhood, you know, and a developer came in and take it there, sooner or later we'd have to decide at what component do we take over the park. You know, we take over the park. It's no different than any other development. And now the thing is that I think I was surprised to find out last year that we didn't own it. So we have a responsibility, not necessarily because of the perception, but that's typically what we would do in any other development. So I don't understand I understand that the difficulty is because we don't want to be subsidizing the private sector, but we do that with the TIRZ already. We've already decided about this, what it is. And then the other thing is that, so how much revenue in ad valorem does the island? Well, no, we can't. So I just want to ensure and be confident that all these council members understand we approved it. And I think the only reason perhaps Councilman Hernandez didn't is because he didn't agree with the overall capital budget. So I obviously support this project, and I think we need to move forward full steam ahead, and I'm sorry if it got off track.
Thank you, Board Member Pereira. Board Member Pusley.
Yeah, I just feel like I got took to the woodshed. You know, I realize we approved this last year, Councilman, but it doesn't mean that we can't continue to ask questions about anything we do on a go-forward basis. I think if we lose sight of doing that, then we've lost sight of our fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers. And I said at the beginning of my questioning, it's not that I don't support this project. I think it's a great project. I think it's something we need to do. We just need to all understand the ramifications of that. And the ramifications of that is this is going to be something that we have to maintain forever. The city's going to assume that responsibility, and it's a big responsibility. So, anyway.
Thank you.
Can I just ask Jeff or Heather, Councilman, to go to that point? Could we, at some point in the future, terminate this easement agreement that we have with the landowners? Say we did the project, and 10 years from now, like, you know what, we don't.
The difficulty is that I think we want to preserve that eligibility for FEMA public assistance.
Legally, could we do it if we wanted to?
So you could conceivably do it, yes, sir.
We could. Would it be at our option, or do they have to agree to the termination?
It would be at our option at that point.
Okay, so we could terminate out if we wanted to, just so the council knows. That's the answer to that. That we could, even after we set up this agreement to have permanent easements, we could say we want to terminate that agreement. What would be at jeopardy, though, is the FEMA funding, should there be a hurricane or some type of coastal event, and we tried to get FEMA funding. That would go away with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Edmonds. Moving on, presentation and discussion on the proposed 24-25 budget.
Okay. We'll go ahead and this will be the first of 2 meetings that we'll have on the budget. So we'll introduce the budget, and then the board will then approve the recommendation for the budget in July. So just looking where we are and where we are going. So the first column over to the left is what the adopted budget was for fiscal year 23. The second column there right next to it is what the adopted budget was for 24. Then we did have some amendments to the budget in 24. So that middle column is the amended budget for 24. The next column is the fiscal year 24 estimated actuals. That's where we think we're going to end the year. And then what we're proposing in the budget for 25. So revenues have increased slightly from 24 to 25. And then we'll walk through what those expenditures are going forward on further slides. So one of the things you will see is that reserve for maintenance. Prior to the extension of the TIRZ, we had $500,000 for maintenance on Packery Channel. And so we will be bringing forward in July a decision to go ahead and release that a $500,000 reserve, because we are putting aside about $1.5 million a year now in for the maintenance and ongoing maintenance of Packery Channel. And so this, we feel like that this separate reserve is not necessary going forward, since we have a defined program for that ongoing maintenance. So then looking at the budgeted revenues, the tax revenue for the top line is the estimated tax revenue for the city. The second line is the estimated tax revenue produced by the county. Just a reminder that on the renewal, the hospital district was not able to participate. And so any amounts that we are receiving are related to past due or delinquent taxes that are still being collected. We are still receiving a good amount in investment income. So we are looking at a total of about $6.5 million in proposed revenue for fiscal year 25. Then looking at the proposed expenses, this is a high-level viewpoint, and we'll go into more detail here. But that top line is kind of our general administrative and activities line. We're budgeting $4.2 million for 25. That includes, as you will see, between the amended budget and the actuals, it is reduced by $4 million. That is the $4 million amount for Briscoe King Pavilion. We are still working with the county to bring forward the more details on that project. And so what we're doing is rebudgeting that $4 million in fiscal year 25. Then we have the operating transfer out, which is based off of the projects that we'll be funding, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So looking at the budgeted projects, like I said, under the TIRZ number 2 activities account, there's $250,000 for the ongoing Packery Channel maintenance. So we've got that $2.5 million basically split, with $250,000 staying in the operating that can be used for more routine maintenance and things along those lines, and then $1.25 million that is going into the CIP for those longer term, more capital type maintenance. The $4 million for the Briscoe King Pavilion. And then looking at the CIP projects that are being funded within that transfer, one is the $1.3 million for the second year of the effluent water line rehabilitation extension. One thing we do with CIP projects is normally we budget for design in the first year and then construction in the next 2 years, depending on the scope of that. This one is actually being undertaken by the developer. We partnered with the developer to do it, so we will be paying the full amount out in fiscal year 25. It is the second year of the North Padre Island Paper Street project, so there's $3.1 million is being budgeted. The North Padre Island seawall improvements that we just talked about, in the first year there was $2.7 million that was budgeted, and so we're rounding this out to $1.1 million that'll be budgeted in fiscal year 25, with the remainder being budgeted in 26 and 27 for the major construction. And then, like I mentioned, the $1.25 million for the Packery Channel repairs that is being held in reserve when we start getting those larger projects coming in. So one of the things, and we can discuss this more in July if we feel that we're short on time, is at the last meeting we did talk about the potential of including a potential business development program within the TIRZ. Right now within the TIRZ it's primarily infrastructure that are eligible projects, and so one of the things that we have had several businesses come forward asking if there's any type of business development incentive or program within the TIRZ. As it stands right now there is not, and so that is something that we wanted to discuss with the board to see if there was interest interest. There seemed to be some interest when we mentioned it last month. And so I know that we're running a little bit tight on time, but if there's any thoughts on that, we can take that now and then bring forward back a little bit more comprehensive discussion in July.
Any questions? All right, Board Member Klein.
Thank you. Heather, just clarify for me.
Yes.
The 1.25 million for Packery Channel, that's going to come out of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Project. Is that correct?
So it is being, that money is being accumulated over in the CIP. And so we have a maintenance schedule that's like an annual maintenance, every 2-year maintenance, every 5-year dredging. And so on average, we need about 1.5 million to fund that over the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And so 1.25 million goes into CIP to accumulate for those bigger projects. $250,000 stays within the TIRZ for more of the routine type maintenance.
So just help me to understand this.
Yes.
Is it correct to characterize this as we're moving maintenance of the Packery Channel from the TIRZ to the CIP?
It's more of where the money is going to be sitting. So instead of having it sitting in the operating on the TIRZ, we're taking that money on an annual basis, moving it into our CIP fund. Mm-hmm. We don't have a program, we don't have a project against it.
The CIP is not a part of TIRZ.
It is, that is the TIRZ CIP. So yes, it is.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's not, it doesn't go into the general fund or
Right.
whatever. There is specific accounts that track the amount of projects that are being funded by the TIRZ. And so if you remember when I presented the financial statements, there was that sheet that showed all of our projects. That is in a segregated account that doesn't get commingled with general fund or utilities or whatever.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Board Member Guardo.
Thank you. Heather, could you just give us a little synopsis of what the business development, I'm very interested in hearing a little bit more about how that would work.
So just similar to what we have in TIRZ number 3, the downtown TIRZ, and TIRZ number 4, for the North Beach, we have projects that encourage business development. And so one of the things that we would need to refine is what type of businesses. The island is growing, but there is, we have some deficiencies within the type of businesses that we have on the island. So is it the board's recommendation that maybe we encourage entertainment type venues, or that we encourage retail type venues, or maybe a specific type of retail? I know there's been conversation about we only have one grocery store on the island. And so we would need to, just like we've done within the downtown TIRZ and with North Beach, is to craft those projects to help with those type of startups or expansions or new businesses that may be coming in on the island.
And it seems, I'm not sure, and maybe Dan can provide some insight, being it's his district, but it seems like I love the idea, but I also think that we would need their input.
Yes.
Like a stakeholder, some sort of committee to create out there to say, okay,
exactly.
What do we need? What do you feel we're needing, or what's lacking?
And we can do that. We just recently did a survey on North Beach to collect some of that information to understand what people are looking for, what they feel like we don't have, what they think we should attract. And so we've done that. That is definitely something that we can do down the island too. Yeah. But I wanted to make sure that, the question is the board interested in pursuing something along those lines? And if so, then we can take those steps to go ahead and move towards developing that program based off of that input.
Yeah. I would absolutely be in support of it, and of course, as mentioned, in creating a task force on the island to make certain that we're hearing what that is precisely.
And just like with a lot of our other programs, while we try to include stuff within the budget, this is something we can always come back and amend the budget as we move through this process to understand what the appropriate dollar amount is, and understand what that program would be.
And the funding, well, I'm wondering if we could use, this 500,000 that we're not going to need.
So the 500,000 is just a reserve of the fund balance. It's not an actual line item, and there is sufficient funding within the TIRZ to create something like this.
That would just go back. That would just.
It just releases that amount in fund balance. Yes.
Right. So there's plenty.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great suggestion on the stakeholder group. Actually, one of the businesses that reached out to me about it, I advised him, I said, well, so what do you have in mind? You know, what mechanism are you proposing? And I told him to look at the North Beach as an example of what we could consider. But to your point, bringing together larger stakeholder groups.
And I'd like to work
Good.
with you on that, Dan.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So one thing I did want to add, it was the last slide in there, so we have just an update to the board. We have hired a permanent economic development director, and so they will be joining the city next Monday, as a matter of fact, is their start date. So it's Arturo Marquez, who is currently with the city of Eagle Pass. He'll be joining us as the permanent economic development director, so that doesn't mean you don't get to talk with me, but it does mean that there will be somebody to assist me in these efforts, and they will be more doing more of this FaceTime with you as we move forward. So, okay.
Thank you.
Great.
There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, nice to meet you.